What is going on, everyone? It is me, the LoneVaultWanderer, and we are here with episode 99 of the H.A.M Radio Podcast.
And this is Karak with ACG. Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, so it's just Karak and I this week because Maddie, I can't even remember what Maddie said. He's doing PAX or something. Is that correct?
Something small. Something that doesn't matter.
YouTube stuff. I remember last time he wasn't able to make it, and I said YouTube stuff, even though he was at a review event. So I don't think this is super secret, but I think he's at PAX. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
So I'm actually uploading this to his channel, hence the background picture. At this time, I haven't decided what the background picture will be, but I'm going to try and make it as funny as possible. to embarrass
Make it a
Maddie
Nintendo picture and see if they copyright
it. Well, the thing is, we are going to be talking about the Nintendo Switch first, so who knows? All right, and obviously, Karak and I, we've both had the Nintendo Switch since launch, so we want to talk about it a little bit, talk about our experiences. And first, Karak, I just want to know, generally, we can get into the specifics in a bit, but just generally, what are your thoughts with the Nintendo Switch? I just had a bit of indigestion there. Excuse me.
That's all right. So there's I actually like the way it feels in your hand, like when you're just, it's one of those systems that you could sit in bed and play it for a while before you fall asleep, that kind of stuff. I think that form factor wise, I'm pretty stoked. I actually really do like it in its normal portable form. Yeah. I have the Pro controller, and then I also use their generic whatever. I don't know what that controller thing is that they put in there that you can take the Joy-Cons off and connect to.
They just call it the grip.
They call it the grip. There you go, the grip. We got the grips. And you know what? The grips, that's what I'm going to call it from now on. It worked well as well. Like I wasn't actually, playing it going, oh, no, I can't play Zelda this way or anything like that. So the thing that bothers me, I'm just being brutally honest, dude. I'm completely, the battery life is unacceptable. And that's the one of all the things that bother me on this system. It's the battery life. It is ridiculous.
So battery life, for anyone that doesn't know, and I want to actually know your experiences with this. Nintendo allege that it's up to 6 hours with any use, but if you're playing Legend of Zelda constantly, that'll last you about 3 hours. Is that what you're finding?
Yeah, and it's longer to charge it. So basically, it's about 3.5 hours to charge, and it lasts about 2 hours and 50 minutes to 3 hours if you're playing Zelda. So technically, your charge takes longer than the playtime does. And I get that it's a powerful system, but yeah, that bothers me. Hopefully, we'll see somebody mod something,
Well, the other week, it's funny that you mentioned it because I bought a battery pack and I've been experimenting with different amperages. I don't know if the conventions are different from Australia and North America, but I will say that the AC adapter for the Nintendo Switch is about 2.6 amps, and that'll charge it as you play, although very, very slowly. Now I have one at home that's also 2.4 amps, and that'll actually lose charge as you're playing Legend of Zelda. It'll keep the charge up once you're like in the menus or something, but you'll very, very slowly lose charge with a 2.4 amp AC adapter. And then I bought a 3.4 amp battery pack, and that will charge it just fine. So it seems that 2.6 amp, the AC adapter for the Nintendo Switch, is just enough to charge it as you go. So if anyone does have a Nintendo Switch and is looking to buy a battery pack, you need a big battery pack, at the very least, obviously, that has at least 3.4 amps out of one of the USB ports.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, man. That's of all the complaints I have, that's the one that continually sticks with me. Is the battery life is just insane.
It's interesting for me because the way I've been playing it is, just on the train to work every day, and maybe I'll get up to 30 minutes one way of playtime. So that battery life hasn't necessarily affected me in a way that it's probably affected you. So I can see if you're just commuting, or if you're just going to a friend's house or something, it might not be an inhibiting factor. Although I do have an external battery pack, so anytime it gets to like 30-20%, I'll just plug that bad boy in and it's fine. But my general thoughts, like you, I like the feel of it. I think the screen looks really good, although one very nitpicky thing for me, it's super reflective. I don't know if you've tried to play it in the sunlight.
It is. No, it's a mirror, dude. It's a mirror.
It is a mirror, right? Like I remember I was in my car and my girlfriend was driving. We were going back home, and we were in a car, so we weren't in like necessarily direct sunlight. but it was still at times very difficult to see that screen even on full brightness, and I would have to tilt it in different angles. And it's funny because whenever it's like a dark moment in Legend of Zelda, like if you're in a cave or a temple or something, that's when you can like see your face. But if it's a bright open landscape, it's not as bad. But generally, yeah, the screen is very reflective, and compared to like my phone, for example, it is much more difficult to see even in indirect sunlight. So if you want to be taking this outside, you better hope that it's not too sunny, or if it's a cloudy day, that's really when you're going to be able to see it correctly. Yeah, battery life hasn't been that much of an issue for me. The one thing that I've been having issue is the left fucking Joy-Con. Like,
oh, you have sync issues?
I do have sync issues.
Oh, gotcha.
It's so like you said, the Joy-Cons in the Joy-Con grip, I like it. It actually feels okay. For a while, I thought I don't actually need to get a Pro Controller, even though I eventually did, but that's because of sync issues, right? But the first moment, because I was playing in handheld mode for the weekend, and then the first moment I connected it to my TV, I'm thinking, this doesn't feel right. Like, Link is just not moving every now and again. He's always moving of his own volition and then falling off a cliff or something. And I think, what is going on? And then I realized, I did a bit of research, and people saying that they have left Joy-Con issues, which I thought were resolved from the day one patch that I downloaded. And I tried everything to resolve it. But to this day, even after 2 left Joy-Con replacements, so it doesn't seem to be a specific hardware issue, I still have the input lag. So sometimes I'll try and move left or forward, and either he just won't move, or it'll take a while. And sometimes when he's moving, Link that is, he just won't stop moving after I release the joystick. So right. I've been having those issues, which I just got a Pro Controller to not deal with that. And apparently it's down to like the shape and the positioning of the antenna in the left Joy-Con.
Correct.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there was a video of somebody taking it apart. And this is one of the things I do, a lot of RC cars, transmitters, receivers. I mess around with this stuff all the time. And I can tell you that if you're trying to get something in a form factor like Nintendo has, really small, there's certain things you want to make sure that it can't, and you'll see this on the back of a lot of electronics. They'll be like, this electronic device cannot, cause interference, blah, 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 blah. And so what happens is you have to be good enough to pick up the signal, but not be too good or not be too broadcast heavy that you're causing interruptions with like people's TV remotes and shit, all that kind of stuff. And so it is most likely that. And I think when you look at it, it just, whether it was a testing issue or what, I think that unfortunately it's hit enough people, because Kotaku actually did talk to, I guess Nintendo admitted that, yeah, we do know that there's issues with those, because Kotaku had a little story a couple days ago about it.
Yeah.
So at least Nintendo knows, but it's going to be very weird to see if they try to fix that with a patch, because, I mean, you can adjust some stuff, but signal strength, but
yeah,
I don't know. I'm a little nervous about it, to be honest.
Well, the thing is, like, I think it's obvious that you can do something with a patch. That day one patch seemed to have fixed the issue, at least for a lot of people that had the pre, or like the review code, whatever you want to call it, Nintendo Switches. But again, for some people like me, are still having issues. And because I've replaced the Joy-Con, left Joy-Con twice now, it's obviously not down. If it's an issue with everyone's left Joy-Con. And maybe some people have experienced it and other people haven't, just because of different layouts of different people's rooms and apartments and houses. So for me, for example, I'm sitting relatively far back from the TV. I've got a couch. I've got a coffee table in between. And then I've got my Xbox One. I've got my Steam Link. I've got different devices. So that kind of environment could just be leading to a bad sync issue. Whereas some other people, like Maddie, for example, who might have his TV closer to his Nintendo Switch, just haven't been having those issues. So some people just experience it, some people don't. But I think it's a universal issue with every left Joy-Con, because I can't fathom the chances of me replacing 2 left Joy-Cons and having the exact same defect or dud Joy-Cons. I don't think that's possible.
No, I mean, and I definitely agree with you, because the people that I know, only about 9 people have Switches that I know, but 8 of them have sync issues, including myself. So wow. It's all. I think it's pretty much. I mean, I don't think anybody's really looking at this assuming that it's a bunch of people with mass hypnosis. I think, I mean, it is an issue with the Switch, and they do need to fix it. They do need to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And then of course make sure people like yourself are financially, in some way reimbursed for it.
Well, I had to buy the Pro Controller just to get around those sync issues, which obviously with the Pro Controller, there's been absolutely no sync issues, and it's the much more comfortable controller to use.
Right,
Especially when you're playing Zelda and you have the D-pad, it's just much better to use. But what are your other thoughts about the Nintendo Switch? Let's talk about the games, right? We know Breath of the Wild is phenomenal. At least I think it's phenomenal. What do you think about Breath of the Wild?
Well, real quick, I want to say one more thing that slightly bothers me, real quick before we move to games. The right thumbstick, when you're holding it in mobile form, is a little too low for me.
Yes. My hand cramps up.
Yeah, my hand cramps up. So I have tried to hold it like 11 different ways, and I've been talking to people on other podcasts going like, are my hands am I deformed? What's going on?
You're absolutely
and every
right.
person says that there's something slightly odd about the right joystick's thumb pad and where it is, a thumbstick and where it is. It's just off enough to make me in Zelda, let's say, have a little have to move it down and sort of hold it weird.
No, sometimes when I'm holding it in handheld mode, as you said, I find myself not with the left one, but with the right one, having to move the positioning because my hand is just cramping up very, very slightly. It's not like a massive issue because I'll just slightly move my hand and then, I'll keep playing. But every now and again, I'm like, it's just somewhat uncomfortable, the positioning. So I don't know. Maybe it's because we have bigger hands. I don't know what
it could be. I think also it's just they've done a minimalist form, right? They've tried to make it as small as possible, but still have a nice big screen. And I think that we're looking at a situation where any smaller would be obviously cramped up in all ways, and so they made it just big enough that people can play it for a certain amount of time without having issues, and that's fine. And their test pattern could have been, let's test people for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 3 hours, 8 hours, and they were like, let's throw out the 8 because of the battery and stuff. Let's look at these other time frames, and they decided that it was okay, even if people did report issues. When it comes to games, I think Zelda's okay. I'm only about 25 hours into it, so maybe it, as I said recently, maybe at 27 it suddenly becomes something different. But when it comes to games, I really like it, but I haven't been like, ta-da, like some people have.
Well, look, I've been really enjoying the Switch so far, and that's because I've had a game that I really love, being Breath of the Wild, and I'm sure many other people are in that same scenario. My issue is because Breath of the Wild, not really an issue, it's just more of a query. Once Breath of the Wild is completed by a lot of people, given that it is so long, like up to 40, 50 hours, what happens then? What happens to people's opinions of the Switch then? When their favorite game or one of the big blocks, actually probably the only big blockbuster game on that Switch now, what happens to people's opinions of the Switch then? Does the lineup of games on the Switch start to become much more apparent when that game is completed?
Oh, and I think so. I mean, I know that I think it was Boogie and Shinobi both were posting that they're playing Skylanders and they like that because the way it works, you don't need a portal. And so you've got a Skylanders title, which like it or hate it, a lot of people like it, and it's a fairly popular, fairly popular title. But it is just a port, and so that's I think what you're looking at is when we stop talking about Zelda and one of the next big games is a port, that is an issue. Yeah. And it's an issue with Sony and Microsoft every time they release a console. So I don't think it's unfair to ding Nintendo for the same thing. I think personally it's got some issues with its library for sure.
Well, the thing is, when I first bought my Xbox One, I distinctly remember there being a lack of games. And I don't think anyone's saying that, they should have more games. It's a new console launch. I think that the amount of games, if they didn't have Zelda, obviously that's a big no-no. But I think the amount of games that are there now is just enough to satisfies people's thirst, for lack of a better phrase, until there's the next big game. And I think the next big game is Mario Kart, which I know is an older game, but many people that are just getting back into Nintendo games will be fine with Mario Kart for, until the next big launch. My thing is that, yes, Breath of the Wild, I absolutely love it. I think it's probably on par to the feelings that I had when I was playing Ocarina of Time as a kid.
Very cool.
But very cool. I really do believe that the Virtual Console needs to come back very, very soon. And I know people are saying that they're old games, Nintendo needs to focus on new games. I get that, But the Nintendo Switch is meant to be Nintendo's way of bringing back a lot of fans that maybe haven't purchased a Nintendo console for many years. And a virtual console is the perfect way to either allow you to replay a game you haven't played in 10 years, or just to replay Nintendo games that you actually, also play Nintendo games you actually haven't played because you haven't owned a console since the Wii, or maybe even before that. So I think the virtual console is absolutely crucial to come back soon.
Well, yeah, and if you look at, I mean, every console is different, right? Like Xbox is doing backwards compatibility, and they have their specific things that they offer to gamers. PS4 has their specific things, and Nintendo Switch has its. And one of the Switches, personally for me, one of the things that are most important is the virtual console, because that you can't say, oh, look at the awesome IPs these guys have, and then not say, I want the virtual console. Like those two things don't combine. You can't say it's great, but I don't want to play them. Like, well, then you're collecting memories instead of actually experiencing it. So I think it should happen as soon as humanly possible. I'm actually surprised we don't see it day one.
And it's interesting. I don't know. I'm not going to say that it was intentional, but you can't deny that when the virtual console eventually comes, that's going to be another positive boost for the Switch, and people are going to suddenly be a bit more interested, especially if, like, I don't know how they're going to trickle out the games with the virtual console, but at the very least, if they have some big Nintendo 64, big SNES, big NES titles on there, maybe even from the Wii or even the GameCube, like, I think that would be awesome. Could you imagine having what's that Zelda game from the GameCube? It's Wind Waker. Imagine having Wind Waker, right?
My favorite one.
It's my favorite that would be, and I think Wind Waker would be perfect for the Nintendo Switch. It's a great fit.
Oh, yep. And it doesn't Wind Waker really, at least to me, Wind Waker and Breath of the Wild feel like spiritual successors of, like, I don't know if it's the look, it's the art style, but for some reason, this new one just looks or feels like Wind Waker, and I'm not 100% sure why.
Maybe it is the artistic style, because it's not really, it's more on the stylized and the realistic side. Right.
And yeah, I just am a little, I mean, every company has their own idea for how they want to roll out PR and how they want to roll out timing, but it certainly does. It doesn't necessarily bode well that we're all excited about virtual console. I'm sorry, but it should have been day one. We should be it should be a feature ad, not a replacement, for true titles.
And see, this is the thing. That goes back to what I was talking about, us being, I guess, most people being happy with Breath of the Wild. Once that's finished, we're going to start to notice the somewhat scarcity of it being, it's a launch console. Of course, there's scarcity of games, but the virtual console is going to be a great way, and I hate using this term, but it's filler. It's going to be great filler in between major releases, like waiting until the next Super Mario, or waiting until Mario Kart, or even Skyrim if you're going to be playing it on the Switch. The virtual console is going to be a great way to pass the time.
Yeah, and in all honesty, I mean, we now know that, like, backwards compatibility matters. People for a long time have been like, how long have we heard this, where it's like, oh, people talk about it, but no one will actually use it. And it's like Xbox has shown, and PS4 now, or whatever the version that they have that's streaming, people do actually want to play those old games. So, it is filler. It is filler. It's filler on the Xbox, and it's filler on the PS4 as well. But filler matters more when there's a lot of gap to fill. And Nintendo Switch at this particular time has a massive gap. Especially when you're looking at newer console versions that it's going up against. See, it's not just going up against PS4 and Xbox One anymore. It's going up against PS4 Pro and the Scorpio. And when people start looking at prices and start seeing, oh, every game works on these new consoles, plus new ones will look better, or we can get the Switch, which has one good game right now. That's a difficult sell for, like, a family member, maybe to buy a present for somebody. There's a lot of thoughts that go into it.
And we were touching on this on a couple of podcasts back. For people like us that, can buy a Switch, can buy an Xbox One, PS4.
Right.
That's not the issue here. The issue is with people that have a certain amount of money that can only stand to purchase one console. So imagine someone that doesn't have any console, for example, and might have a limited amount of money, has been saving up pocket change, whatever, and is saying, all right, what's the better proposition now? Is it the Xbox One, the PS4, or the Nintendo Switch? It depends on who you are. Like, do you value being able to take your games on the go? Do you go to friends' house? Do you commute a lot? But even then, do you still play more at home? And if so, what kind of games do you want to have access to? And that kind of purchasing decision is going to be made much easier once the virtual console once there's newer games. And dare I say, maybe once there's a newer version of the Nintendo Switch out, that's bit more powerful, that has a bit better battery life, that uses the new NVIDIA, what's the newer model? It's not the Tegra X, it's the next one up. The Maxwell.
I thought it was Maxwell, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that the Nintendo Switch it's a great launch, and I think it's got, obviously like with any new console, it's got a couple of years to go to really show its stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what's unfortunate when you think about it. It's like, it always feels weird to me when we talk about this industry because I'm involved in some others. For example, like if I were to buy a car and it could only go 50, and then the next year it could go 60, and the next year it could go 70, I would be absolutely beside myself, and I would hate everything about it. And it's weird that our industry is an industry of piecemealing out to consumers. It's like, you're gonna have a system that when it's released has barely anything and maybe doesn't work so well, and then it's that iteration, which it's cool because it can also offer some amazing gameplay changes as titles or as the consoles iterate, as new things are developed. But at the same time, it's a weird industry when you look at it. If you're involved in any other industry, and I do airsoft, for example, if I bought a gun in airsoft and it only had semi-automatic, and then next year it was upgraded to full auto, like I would be, wait, what? Like that should just work. And that's what happens with these consoles all the time. Like, it's sad we're not having a new discussion here. You know, like Xbox One, like you said, when that came out, it's like, there's not much. PS4, there's not much. Like, and it doesn't work so well or whatever. I don't know. It's like a victim mentality a little bit that we all have. And I mean, I think we accept it, but I certainly don't think it's very consumer friendly for a lot of people.
Well, with the Xbox One, for example, right now, try and compare the feature set of the Xbox One now to what it was at launch. I mean, there's such a huge disparity. I get what you're saying. And now you were to buy an Xbox One, it's even cheaper than what it was at launch. And I guess
it does more.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And I guess that's kind of the growing pains. And I saw a lot of people commenting about this, of being a day one buyer, especially of new hardware. Right. I think it's something that you said that we I can't remember the specific phrase, but we kind of just move on because it's a day one console. We understand that, and we're willing just to play the new Zelda, just to experience this new console. We're willing to experience and go through those growing pains.
The thirst is real, brother.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, exactly right.
We'll deal with it because we really want to play Zelda.
But that's the exact
Halo
point.
It's like Halo. Oh my God, Halo's coming out. I'm gonna play my Xbox One that just randomly doesn't, work or read discs. For example, my Xbox One original. I don't know if anybody remembers, but they had a ton of problems with the original Xbox One not reading discs. You would get it, and you would have to. There was actually videos on how to get it to read discs because sometimes it wouldn't suck the disc all the way in. Yeah. And I've got an Xbox One that does that. And it's so funny, but people were like, it sucked, but they were like, oh, I'll work around it because there's this, one particular title that they wanted to play. It's just the thirst is real, man.
At times, it's kind of, I guess, refreshing to see how understanding gamers can be. But of course, there is a limit. Of course, there is a limit. Like, for example, going back to the hardware with the Nintendo Switch, I know that a lot of people have been experiencing scratching on the screen when you're docking and undocking, right? And if I didn't have a screen protector, I would have those scratches. I do see the somewhat scuff marks in the bottom left and the bottom right of my Switch as I'm docking it in. And that's just, like, I don't know why. I just had this kind of mentality when I first saw the dock. I thought there must be some sort of felt or some sort of nice material to protect the screen as it's docking in, because they're doing it so smoothly on the ads and on the demos. But now, when I'm putting it in, I'm just fucking holding it on for dear life and making sure it doesn't touch the dock because it's hard plastic.
And I put felt in. Did exactly. Yeah, there. You can buy them off Amazon, little tabs of felt, and I just got the thinnest tabs I possibly could and put them in there, and that works fine. But I hate the idea that when I buy the Switch, I need a Pro controller because the Switch left Joy-Con doesn't work, and I need a screen protector because it scratches the screen.
Yeah. But although,
it's weird.
Because it is something that you're taking on the go, screen protector is I'll just hit my mic, is absolutely essential, right? It's like with a mobile phone. But that being said, you wouldn't expect to need a screen protector when you're using it in the dock. That's a bit of a different proposition. So, and I don't know, I saw some rumors about how Nintendo took the dock off of their online store for some reason.
They did.
So do you know what that was about?
No, actually, it's funny you mentioned that, though, but because yesterday I got online and I think it was NeoGAF, I can't remember, one of the forums I'm subscribed to, and I saw that thread and people were like, they just took the dock off of the stores, and I have no clue why. But I did see the news.
Well, some people have said that the new docks that they've bought are a bit more of a snug fit, like they're not all the right or the same size. So I don't know. Wow. I don't really know, because my dock is like, if you put the Switch in there, it's somewhat, there's a lot of movement. Well, there's not a lot of movement, but you can move it back and forth quite a bit.
Mine as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I don't know if someone's bought another dock and thought, wow, this is really snug. It's adding to my scratching on the screen. So I don't know. Like,
I didn't even think of that, dude. Mine does move a lot. And yeah, so if it's any tighter, that would cause... Yeah, I wouldn't want it to be tighter than it is right now.
Well, what I'm doing now is, as I move it out of in and out of the dock, I'd prefer it to kind of scrape along the back of the Switch as opposed to the front.
Right.
If there's scratches on the back, eventually I'll get over it because I'm not seeing it all the time. But if I had a major scratch on my actual screen, fucking hell, I'd be so annoyed with myself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but like you said, I mean, it is mobile, so. Screen protector is probably pretty much your first purchase for most folks anyway. I think one of the problems that a lot of people had with screen protectors is Hori, H-O-R-I, or Hori. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. They're one of the major manufacturers.
Yeah.
And they made a mistake on their Switch's screen protectors, and they're terrible. And so on Amazon, they've got half of a star, and people are like, "Whoa, this is not up to their normal quality." Blah blah blah. And I'm like, God. The fact that you now have to go, okay, I need a projector. Now I got to go check to see if this one actually works with the new system. I got to put felt in the dock. I don't know. It is a weird time that we live in, man.
And another weird thing as well, because I got the travel case, the standard travel case for the Nintendo Switch, works fine, and it comes with a screen protector. And then when you start using it and think, well, I never want to touch the screen on this. I mean, look at the fingerprints. So now you start looking into screen protectors with anti-fingerprint coating. And then you think, wow, the screen's really protective. Maybe I need a screen protector with anti-glare technology or, a matte material. There's just so many things that you start to realize. And this is all growing pains. And it's what you said before. I think a lot of gamers are willing to push through this because in many other regards, Nintendo has been doing very well with this console. I mean, the fact that I can go to my console in a couple of minutes and access the Japanese store, that's fucking huge. That's absolutely massive. When would we have been able to do that with a Nintendo console back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, they've made some inroads. We don't know how many of these were made because they knew they had issues, but they've definitely had some inroads to the consumer that are pretty cool. Especially stuff like that, which just has not been. I mean, it's sort of a known secret that the Xbox One you can do that, but with Nintendo stuff, it's always been either impossible or some kind of strange hassle. So it's very cool that they've added that.
Yeah. So what are your final opinions on this at this stage on the Switch?
It's okay. I'm not in love with it though. I mean, I don't do scores, but I would say it's middling or above. It's got enough little issues that, and the right thumbstick, now that I mentioned it to you, and then the more we've been talking, I've been looking at it because it's right in front of me. And I'm like, it dawned on me just now how often I'm adjusting because of that. I think that for somebody with smaller hands, because I got mitts, I got catcher mitts for hands.
Yeah,
so I think that for some people with smaller hands, it probably works fine. But it is cool because here's the thing, dude. I wish they had marketed this differently, Lone, because if they had marketed it just hey, here's a handheld that occasionally works at home, it's very powerful. Yes, battery life sucks, but it's very powerful. It's got a pretty insane game, Legend of Zelda, or Zelda. I think that some people who are having so many issues with it might have looked at it a little bit differently because once you dock it, Zelda's frame rate does tank.
It does.
And it does. And I think that it would be best if they were just and you can also plug it into your TV instead of that being a major selling point.
Well, it was interesting that you say that because I specifically remember the time or the area in the game. So I was heading towards Kakarika Village. You climb up this big cliffside and then there's this forest. And I was playing it on my handheld and killing enemies in this forest and thinking, all right, cool. I'm going to swap to the TV. As soon as I swapped to that TV, that frame rate dropped. in that specific forest. Nowhere else in that close vicinity. But that area, it just tanked. And it's obviously when there's a lot of particle effects and enemies in the area. But
there's a lot of alpha and transparencies that Switch is certainly not powerful enough to do.
But like, and handheld, because people have been saying on handheld mode that the Switch runs really well. And whether it's down to, you know, it being a 720p screen, so it's matching the frame rate, I actually prefer to play this thing on the go.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. But
I don't know.
Overall, though, I am enjoying the Switch at the moment. There are growing pains, but I went through very similar growing pains with the Xbox One. And now it's an amazing console, and I'm gonna, because of that, I'm gonna hold out on the Switch. Wait to see when the Virtual Console comes. Wait to see what games are on the Virtual Console. How many third parties support this thing? Because in the end, what's really gonna matter is software and nothing else.
Yeah, and also, I mean, for me especially, like, dude, it for handhelds, if you just compare it to other handhelds, maybe the 3DS probably is better. But I think it kicks ass as a handheld. Like if that's all you're going to use this as, and you've got a good battery pack like you do, you've got a system that is pretty freakishly powerful for a handheld. Yeah. And works very well in that particular arena, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe in a couple of weeks we'll do another rundown of the Switch.
Yeah.
Once more games
Zelda's over.
No, I think that's important. I think that's a very important point, because once I finish Zelda, which is going to fucking take forever, but once that does happen, if I don't have if the Virtual Console there, I don't know what I'm going to do with it, because for me, there's nothing else to play. But we'll talk about that when we get to it. So the second topic that we have for today's podcast is essentially the last 6 months of gaming. And Karak mentioned this in our chat. Do you want to go into a bit more detail what you wanted to talk about with this?
Yeah, I just wanted to get your opinion on. So we talk about the last 3 months, especially for Sony, with Neo and all the other games that have just come. But what's strange, or what's cool to me, is that if you look at the fall last year, you had Microsoft as well with Horizon and various different Horizon 3, various different games that they've done, Gears. Yeah. And I was just looking at the last 6 months. I was like, okay, I'm going to look at the last 6 months and just look at games, PC, Xbox, PS4, and just see what we can see. And it's pretty insane when you have an argument between Battlefield 1 and Titanfall 2.
Yes.
It's like who's the better girlfriend? They're both hot. And that's and nice, by the way, because I know people will be like, all he cares about is looks, which is true. But no, seriously, when you look at this situation, man, if you asked me when this has been repeated, when a 6 month period like this has been repeated, there's one particular time that a lot of developers and a lot of publishers and, well, a lot of gamers will talk about, which is when the 360 had BioWare, Bizarre, and Bungie. They had the 3 Bs. And they had that one, Shane Kim had that one, like, 1 year period where it was like they had a bunch of specific for 360 titles. This is the industry, though. And you look at the entire industry, that's the last time I can remember a 6 months that is this fucking awesome. It's so awesome that we forget how awesome it is. Like, we forget that Titanfall 2 is insane. We forget that Battlefield 1 is insane. We just look at Neo, or we look at Horizon. We forget that Horizon, for many people, Forza Horizon 3 was insane. Like, it's awesome, man.
But you know what it is? When a new game comes out, everyone raves about it. It's amazing. But just because of how the internet works, 1 or 2 weeks passes on and we're looking on to the next thing. And we don't realize, as you said, how many great games there actually have been in the past 6 months. Titanfall 2's campaign was amazing. And people that haven't played that fucking campaign, I highly recommend doing so. Battlefield 1 was also fun as well. Resident Evil 7, I'm having a blast.
Oh, dude, I forgot Resident Evil. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's insane. That's the thing, is you could sit there and I bet you could say 20 games, and of those, I might have reviewed some of them even, but your brain is almost like numb with awesome. Like, honestly, and I just think it's a time to where there's a lot of bad shit in the industry, but if there's one thing I take away, it's that the last 6 months has been pretty fucking phenomenal.
Well, let's put it this way, right?
Really happy.
Just to actually try and get some numbers around this. If you go to Metacritic, the last 90 days, there are over 40 games, and there are some duplicates here, but over 40 games that have an 80 or above Metacritic score.
Right.
That's pretty decent, right? And you're looking at some of these games. I mean, For Honor is on there. We can talk about that because I've been liking the campaign for For Honor. I think it's great. Mm-hmm. You've got Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Nier Automata, you've got Horizon Zero Dawn, you've got Neo, you've got Resident Evil. Like, how many great games have come out? Like, really?
Yeah, and so I guess to me, it's also the fact that, you know, one, we can be numb to it. Two, we might not like a game somebody else likes, whatever. Yeah. But if you look at it as an industry, even expansions, for example, I'll mention again, but Forza Horizon's Blizzard Mountain expansion literally took that game to a complete. That's an expansion. Like that's how good games. Like there's something very cool about that. It's very cool to be able to say this expansion is so good because I'm going to be brutally honest. Most of the time when I talk about DLC, I'm not very happy about it.
Yeah.
And DLC and even that we've seen is incredible. Also, let's remember this has been a fairly, I would say, a slightly more critical time from a lot of reviewers towards games. There's been a lot of games that haven't scored very well that I think if we looked at them 2 years ago would have. And so now that we see these awesome scores, we start to see that, you know, I mean, even the reviewers themselves are looking at a lot of these titles and going, whoa, there's some pretty serious quality.
And at times, I guess I can see some reviewers, and I'm not going to say this is a broad statement, but you're finding it hard to find something bad to say about a game, like at least the games that have released quite recently. And, you know, taking For Honor, for example, I know that people are mostly playing that game for the multiplayer, but I've been playing that game for the single player, and it's been a great experience. If you actually play it, it has a very interesting story, and the gameplay, of course, is its highlight. And I find it difficult to find something bad to say about that game. I find it difficult to find something bad to say about Resident Evil. Maybe the frame drops at times, but overall, that's a pretty good game. Where this year's, even though there hasn't been like, I guess, a huge blockbuster games. Like we've had Legend of Zelda, for example, but we haven't had like crazy huge AAA games, but we've still had amazing games that have come out that are somewhat mid to higher tier. And I think it's really great to see. Like Horizon Zero Dawn, who would have thought that would have been the game that it was? I haven't played it personally, but I can see the positive things that are being said about it. It looks incredible.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Horizon Zero Dawn, I don't think I'm incorrect on this. I think I just saw a thread where that thing sold like classic numbers, like insane numbers.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And to one console. That's another thing to remember. These are not third-party games. These are, you know, a lot of these are coming out to either the PS4 or prior to that, the Xbox One. So you're seeing, you know, particular consoles having this. And yeah, it's awesome. Also, the fact that like you're mentioning, let's say, you know, the single player campaign for For Honor, and then you have the single player campaign for Titanfall 2 that are both really good. The unique style of campaign that I don't think is amazing, but is still really good in Battlefield. Yeah. You have these situations where, I'm going to be honest, many times those games didn't have even a single player component prior. I mean, Titanfall 1 did not have a true single player. It just had the fucking tutorial stuff. And
you're right. And I tell you what, that Titanfall 2 campaign was amazing, and I would have loved to have seen one in the original Titanfall, because I don't know whether it's fair to say that all games need a single player, because I don't believe that. I think if a game does multiplayer really well, like Overwatch, then that's fine, right? But when a game does have good components of both, that's a really awesome thing to see, because sometimes I don't want to play multiplayer. I just want to play a single player campaign, even if it's 6 to 10 hours long. If I buy a $90 game, because it's not $80 to $90 in Australia, and play a single player. I know, and then play a single player game for up to 10 hours. I'm happy with that. Some people might not be, but I personally am.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. It's been pretty cool to see this change come about. You know, we see the opposite, unfortunately. Like, let's say Ghost Recon Wildlands, where the single player isn't very good, but multiplayer is really good. But overall, what we are seeing, at least to me, is a lot of companies realizing how important it is. Well, for example, a game that a lot of people didn't like, but I did. And so people can call me a shill, whatever the fuck you want to. But I loved Infinite Warfare's Battlestar Galactica style campaign.
Karak, dislikes coming.
What'd you say?
Dislikes are coming on this video.
Yeah. The single player, the campaign, the Battlestar feel of it was really fun to me. And it's funny because I have a lot of people who are like, dude, I don't agree with you. And just now recently they did a sale and people had bought it and were like, holy shit, this single player is fun like that.
Yeah.
But it, a lot of the old hates get added. But it's cool to see a lot of the companies doing something different and we're sort of being rewarded by it. And, Neo, I think I always expected Neo to do good, but I didn't expect it to be as good as it was because I fucking fell in love with Neo. Nier is another title. Nier. If you had told me Nier would be scoring higher than Horizon 2 weeks ago, I would have been like, wait, what? And when I scored it, people were like, this fucker's lying. And I'm all, no, it's that good. And then it was like every other person who started dropping reviews was like 9.5. And that game is phenomenal. Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Like that, it's a platinum title. I would have assumed it would have done well, but not as well as it did.
Yeah. So while we're on this topic of newer games that are coming out and they're being good, you mentioned a game that we were going to talk about later, but you can talk about it now. So Ghost Recon Wildlands. You've done a review. You've done a review on it. I haven't played it, so I'm just going to ask a bunch of probing questions.
Sure.
What are your general thoughts on that game first?
I think that there's actually, and I said this in the review, but people are pretty binary. But it's not that it's necessarily bad; it's that it's bland. So it's like Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Blandlands in a way. Like and the dynamic. There's no dynamic in that title that or narrative that really steers you away from seeing the gameplay mechanisms at work. If you talk to any developer, they're going to tell you right away, lying and fooling the gamer is the number one thing you want to do. And because you want them to feel like you're lying, it's a fiction. You're trying to sell your fiction. That game does not sell fiction very well at all. In fact, in some of the quests, some of the missions, you'll see people just spawning right in front of you. Like there's a lot of, and there's no narrative to hide that. And what happens is you can see the mechanism a little too easily. However, if you get some friends in, just like I said in the review, if you get 4 people in and you're just fucking going, incredibly fast down a hill in your Suburban and you're following a convoy firing, there are a few games that don't feel that cool. It's like America fuck yeah. You're just like, oh yeah, you have those moments. But as a complete narrative, as a complete thing, I just felt it pretty bland.
So I will ask the question relating to that. There are games that are out there that obviously, as you said, they play really well when you have a bunch of people with you, but when you're playing it on your own, it can be a bit boring. The game that I always refer to when we're talking about this subject is the very first Borderlands. I played that game on my own and returned it.
Oh, right.
Right? I returned it because I'm thinking, this is boring. Like, what am I doing? And then my mate's like, you know what? No, buy it again and we'll play it together. It'll be a blast. And that was probably the best decision that I've ever made because now I played Borderlands 1, Borderlands 2, a little bit of the pre-sequel, and it's been an amazing franchise when you play it with friends. Like I think the way you're meant to play it. Is Ghost Recon Wildlands similar to that? Do you think it could have longevity being a game that you play with your friends and have a lot of fun with?
Sorry if you can hear the lawnmower in the background. So when it comes down to what I just think that Wildlands is one of those titles that when you look at it, across what it offers, right?
Yeah.
Like what the different bits it offers. It is where it shows us that, well, for example, actually, let's scratch that. If you look at Division, if you look at other Ubisoft games, Siege, both of those games started out and didn't do so well. There was a lot of issues at their starting, and over time, Ubisoft has gone and really picked those up and fixed those. I think Wildlands is a good skeleton, but I think that unfortunately, you can see a lot of issues that you couldn't see in Division. For example, in Division, the way the maps are created and their narrative, the way it was set up, you couldn't see somebody spawn as easy. You did sometimes, but here, because you're playing 500 miles away, you can see people for 500 miles. Right. You can see them spawn into existence. And so I think that hopefully, yes, it's fun with multiplayer, but I think it will get even more fun in both single player and multiplayer when Ubisoft sees the consumer, what they like and don't like, and sort of fixes some stuff.
So it has some potential.
Legitimate things. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, awesome. All right. So do you have any lingering thoughts on Ghost Recon Wildlands? Would you play it again, like after your big review, or are you pretty much done with it?
Okay. So I did try to play it. I posted on Twitter the sad story, but basically I got some people together, and about 20 minutes into it, all three of them said, I would rather go read a book. I'm done.
No, wow.
Yeah, and those are people who purchased it. So, I know that people like this. Don't think just because I'm saying this that it's not good. It's just my opinion, and I was the one who wanted to play. I'm like, hey, everybody, let's play. I was having a good time, and they started pinging me, and they were like, this is just not that fun. I'm going to go do something else. And I was like, whoa, okay. So I would personally play it again, but I would have to be with like you, Maddie, like knowing that you're with friends and just sitting back, knowing the AI is not going to be good at all, and just plunking people from 100 yards out. And I would certainly do that.
Have a beer while you're playing it. That sounds like a great night.
Yep. Yeah. And some people are stressed out. One guy told me, he's like, dude, I don't have time for narrative. Like I don't have the time for story. So for me, Wildlands is great because I just sit down and play. Yeah, some people are mentally really tired after work. They don't want to think about a story or do a puzzle. They just want to fucking shoot somebody in the face.
You know what?
I'm okay with that.
That's a really weird thing to me because I'm not saying I'm old or anything, right? But over the years, I've started to find myself drifting towards watching more Netflix and watching more TV series because I'm finding myself more interested in interesting stories. And I'm finding that exact same thing with games. If a game, no matter how fun the gameplay is, if it doesn't have an interesting story to grip me, it just won't stand out in my mind. And the perfect example of that, as great of a game it was Doom. The single-player game was super fun to play, a lot of great shooting, but that story was just not, compelling at all. You get to the end. I won't spoil what the ending was, but it just didn't have a twist. It wasn't gripping. But it's weird because that's kind of in complete contrast to the guy that you mentioned, who just after he finishes a long day of work just wants to shoot something. Yeah, I'd love to just shoot something, but that doesn't interest me on its own anymore. Like I'm more interested in an actual narrative now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, the one thing I think Wildlands has going for it is they did remove a lot, not all, but they removed a lot of the Ubisoft, let's go collect a fucking feather. They didn't do it as good. They didn't do it as good as Horizon, which I think literally nails it. Like they did such a good job in understanding that. Wildlands does a pretty good job. But I think you're right. Like I would say I agree in many ways with you that that's sort of how I feel, where if there's not a lot of narrative to sort of fool me, I start to just depending on the game, because I don't need a narrative in, some car game or something.
Yeah, of course.
But if it's a particular game, there is some type of narrative I need. And if that falls to the wayside, I would agree that I start to lose interest over time.
Even if it's just to somewhat push the story along. And I'll give an example now. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Based on the same characters it's always been, based on the exact same story arc it's always been, you're saving Hyrule from Ganon, blah, 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 blah. It's not really that interesting. The only thing that's somewhat pushing it along is what happened 100 years ago to Link. You need to find out. That's all there is, but that's enough for me. It's at least something that's pushing me through the story that makes all the other gameplay bits a little bit more compelling and fun because it's moving towards something as opposed to just killing enemies for killing enemies' sake.
And I think it's all the sum of its parts kind of thing too, because a game may have great narrative, may have pretty good gameplay, but one thing sort of doesn't work for one gamer that works for somebody else.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, AI, I know a lot of people who follow me know that I test AI, and I test it religiously. I actually have steps that I test for AI. And I will say in a review, this failed 4 of the 5 steps because I've programmed AI. So it's like some things I know to watch out for. And I get that some people you like a particular thing, I like a particular thing. I don't think it's because you're old. I think what happens is I think it's also your experiences with other games. And what happens, we have a tendency to judge one title against 50 others. Mm-hmm. And that's just in the genre. We always do that. Well, it doesn't have as good of this as this. That's unfair, right?
Yeah.
I try not to do that. But what still happens is you sort of know in the back of your mind, you're like, other games have done this way better.
It's subconscious, right?
Yeah. Like, come on now. We can't keep this shit up. And Zelda is a title that, let's be honest, if it didn't hit the marks, you would be complaining about Zelda. So it does hit the marks that you expect. For me, Wildlands didn't. And
Yeah, it's funny how you talk about you can't really prevent yourself from comparing a game to another game. I literally just saw an article about how, this is their opinion, this is the headline, but Skyrim did things better than Breath of the Wild because it's obvious that Breath of the Wild is somewhat modeled on what a lot of things you could do in Skyrim, and people have instantly made that connection and are making the comparisons. Is it necessarily fair? Maybe not, but it goes to your point.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to read that article because I don't.
I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying that people are making comparisons. I tell you what, though, sure. just cooking food in Breath of the Wild is just fucking fun. I know that's weird to say, but I'm like, dude, I got an apple, I got a mushroom, I'm gonna put this together and sell it for 50 rupees and
let's do what I do every single night, but in a game.
I remember it's okay. I was on a train commuting, and it was like a 30-minute train ride, and all I did was fucking cook food and hunt for food. It
happens, man. I mean, it's like it. I don't know why, but sometimes that grabs. And if it's done well and it feels like rewarding, you can just spend hours doing it. Like, and you know, even subconsciously or consciously, you're like, this is a gameplay mechanic. Like, I'm taking one item and mixing it with another item. This should not be as fun as it is, but it is, you know? Yeah, it's crazy.
Alrighty, so moving on to the next topic, Elder Scrolls Legends. So it's recently come out of beta. There's a full PC launch. There's also an article on Bethesda.net that I'll somewhat read off of. So it's been almost a year since they revealed Elder Scrolls Legends, and they've built the game, this is what they are saying, into a strong, fun experience for Elder Scrolls and strategy card game fans alike. The feedback we've received from the player community has been invaluable, and we are grateful. And where are we today? We are officially launching Elder Scrolls Legends. We are pleased to announce that the PC version of Legends is now out of beta. So I wanted to ask you, Karak, and obviously because this podcast is somewhat involving Bethesda to an extent, have you played or are you interested in Elder Scrolls Legends? Do you like those strategy card games at all?
I do, but I'm already burnt out on the copycats of like Hearthstone copycats and stuff like that. And so I do. I've done a couple reviews for free to play on my channel for various different ones. So it's not that I don't like them. It's that I sometimes really do feel like people are shoehorning in their fiction into a particular genre. And I'm not 100% sure, like it just didn't resonate with me when I played it. Like it's not the reason why I like Elder Scrolls.
Well, isn't this the exact same argument people were saying for Elder Scrolls Elder Scrolls Online when it first came out? They were kind of shoehorning that game into
multiplayer.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And some people were saying, well, that's not what Elder Scrolls is about. But now would you look at it? Like now, if Elder Scrolls Online released as it is now, back at its launch, I think it would have gone over a hell of a lot better because it's an amazing game now, like, at least from what I see.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know because there's far more similarities between an MMO that fights pretty much the same way as Skyrim, which has never had the best combat in the world, and you've got that, and then you have this jump to a card game. So I think that there's a little bit of a bigger split there, just gameplay wise. But for me, it doesn't interest me enough to continue playing it at all. I haven't spent thousands of hours on it though.
Yeah. It's interesting though because you're saying essentially Elder Scrolls it's made that leap to a card game where maybe it's not the best fit, but then you look at like The Witcher, for example, that had this inbuilt card game mechanic in Gwent. That makes a lot more sense. When you look at I know this is really weird to bring up, but I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links on my phone. That's a game it's built up as a card game, or at least like Gwent, it was built in within the context of a much broader game. So if Elder Scrolls itself had like a mini card game, even like New Vegas did with I can't even remember what the card game was called in that, but if they had a mini card game that they released as a smaller game like Legends, would that have made more sense? Like, or are they just trying to make too much of a leap with Elder Scrolls Legends?
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely think that's one of the reasons why Gwent worked was, well, first of all, the game works pretty well. Like even in Witcher 3, it was fairly playable.
Yeah.
And I think that what happens is you have an activity, almost like cooking, where you have an activity and you want to do more of it. Well, you jump into Zelda to cook, but that's not all Zelda offers. Yeah. What happens with Gwent or what happens with Elder Scrolls is they might like a card game in Gwent, and they're like, oh, somebody is just doing the card game as a game. That's great because I like the card game and I spend hours playing it. What happens with Elder Scrolls, exactly like you said, it's like there is no card game. It's just a jump. It's like, wait, what? And the rules there's no fit. None of it really makes sense. It's just an additional title to sort of feed off of Elder Scrolls popularity. And I don't have a problem with that. It's just, it doesn't cause me to fictionally be interested in it and go, ooh, I wonder what's going on in that game.
So you wouldn't pick it up again after it's come out of beta?
No. Mm-mm.
No, fair enough. All right.
Would you?
You know what?
I mean, what do you...
Probably not. Honestly, like, for me, like, card games aren't really my thing. Unless we're talking about, like, Yu-Gi-Oh!, something that I've grown up with as a child. I don't see myself jumping into any card game. Like, even when I was collecting Pokemon cards as a kid, I never played the thing. I just collect the cards because they were cool to look at. Like, and I'm sure
garbage pail kids.
Yeah, no, exactly. Right?
Collect them.
And I never played the actual game. The only card game that I probably played as a kid, as I collected the cards, was Yu-Gi-Oh! But even then, it was more just to collect them and look at the pretty colors. And that sounds really shallow, but it's just not me as a gamer. So I don't think I'm in a fair place to judge that game, because I'd probably be a little bit too critical. Because to me, like, I'm not really into Hearthstone card games like that. So I've pretty much very, very little interest in playing it. But I know that a lot of people do. So I try to be as fair as possible in my questions that I ask.
Yeah.
So one of the last topics that we're going to be talking about, but it's not fucking launching on my phone, are the BAFTA award nominations for 2017. And I guess we can have a little bit of discussion. There's a bunch of different awards, right? Like Evolving Game, Debut Game, British Game, Audio Achievement. So we don't really need to go into all the awards, but I want to list off the nominees for Best Game.
Wait, I have to ask a question.
Yes.
Did you say that are they freaking British Game? What?
Yeah, British. So I'll read the awards just so if you want to know, right? So they got Artistic Achievement, fair enough. Audio Achievement, fair enough. Best Game, British Game, Debut Game, Evolving Game, Family, Game Design, Game Innovation, Mobile. This is a lot of awards. Multiplayer, Music, Narrative, Original Property, Performer, and BAFTA Ones to Watch. What? Okay, there's an award that's like BAFTA Ones to Watch Award in association with Dare to Be Digital. What the hell is that? And then AMD Esports Audience Award, which is, okay, that's more of an esports award in general. So a lot of awards, but yeah, maybe because BAFTA, I think BAFTA is a British organization, so maybe that's why they're trying to, I guess, prop up British games, and I think that's fair. But the best game, all right, so the games that have been nominated include Firewatch, Inside, Overwatch, Stardew Valley, Titanfall 2, which I'm great to see, and Uncharted 4. What do you think of that list of the nominees for the best game?
Well, so there's two things. One, I like the fact that there's a lot of variables in there. Inside is completely different than Uncharted 4, which you see sometimes in game awards where it'll be like 3 different shooters for like best graphics, and you'll be all, come on, there were other games. There were other fucking games out there that had good graphics that weren't shooters. But overall, none of those and that's for what game? Best game of the year?
Best game. So this is, it's not game of the year, but I'm assuming it's the equivalent award.
Man, I mean, there's a lot of games that I would probably replace a couple of those with.
Like what, for example?
Well, oh man, people are gonna hate me. I really tried to play and like Inside.
Yeah.
I thought that game just did not work for me. So this is just my opinion. I would have switched out Inside with something else. But it's I will give them honestly, I got to give them a kudo for being eclectic, because they actually do have a good overall group. I'm surprised. What's the car soccer game?
Rocket League.
Rocket League wasn't that?
See, I don't know when that actually released, because it seems. I think that was part of the Game of the Year award nominations for the last period, because I do remember seeing that a lot. But yeah, no, that is a great game. But for me, I look at this list and I'm thinking, usually with Game of the Award Year nominations that I've seen for 2016, it's always a fight between Uncharted 4 and Overwatch. And I see people on the internet arguing about this. Why is Uncharted 4 not getting this award? I think a little bit is down to fanboyism. Overwatch is just a multiplayer game. It doesn't even have a single player, blah, 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 blah. I wanted to ask you this question. Do you think that a game that is just multiplayer, and I hate this phrase, but I'm going to use it just to ask the question, deserves to be on a Game of the Year award list, or the best game list, if it's just multiplayer?
Of course. I mean, that would be like saying if a game is just football, should it be a game of the like that? Yeah, it's what it tries to do, aim and deliver. And if it does so incredibly well, for example, Rocket League.
Yeah.
Then
I can fantastically well.
Yeah, I can guarantee you that if somebody were to say Rocket League versus any of the other games that came out when it came out, I would have no problem with Rocket League being on there, but there's no guns.
Yeah.
Or maybe there are guns actually, but there's stun stuff. But yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I can see why people might have a problem with it, but I think usually what that boils down to is they don't want competition for the game that they want to win.
Mm-hmm. No, of course.
Is in the list.
As I said, it's down to a little bit of fanboyism. There's a lot of PS4 fans out there, and that's why Game of the Year award, I keep stumbling when I say that. Let's say Best Game of the Year awards always kind of have that fight between, this is my console exclusive, but that's why they're not based on popularity. Because if they were based on popularity, it'd be a redundant contest, right?
It would, yeah.
I think touching on this subject, I'd like to see the notion of all games needing single player to kind of go away, because I don't think that's true anymore. I think, like with Rocket League, Overwatch, a game can just be a multiplayer game just as much as it can be just a single player game and still be a great game and still do very, very well. I don't like to see games that try and do a bit of both that fail, not necessarily even fail in both regards, because you know how development works. Doing one feature will take away resources from the other feature, right? It's just bound to happen. So when a game like, let's say even Doom had a great single player, which is what it was known for, somewhat, and then they had this multiplayer that no one really liked. Imagine if they, even though the single player was great, imagine if they just put all their eggs into that one basket and did a even better single player. I think that would have worked out much better, as opposed to a game trying to do a little bit of both, just to, I guess, fulfill this somewhat arbitrary definition of what a game should be.
Well, no, I mean, that's right. And like you already mentioned, the same thing with single player. Does it have to have multiplayer? Does it have to have single player? I don't think so either. And I think that I'm even more worried about companies thinking that it has to have multiplayer, because I've seen games where the single player is great and you play the multiplayer and you're like, dude, this is just a fucking arena title with some skins from the main characters in here. It's like you skinned every character in the game and you threw them on a model and you just said, here's a multiplayer.
And use the same map as you had in the single player.
Yeah. I mean, come the fuck on. And those resources could be used for, and here's the thing, and this is just my focus, so this is why I'm speaking just for me. But if those resources are coming out with a fairly bland, not very good multiplayer or single player, whichever the may be, I would rather see that money go into sound, music, and voice, and get better voice actors, get better sound, spend some money on those kind of things, spend some money on music, because the focus when you split it like that, and especially with a different, it's a completely different mode. Yeah. If it's not done well, usually it's throwaway. And a lot of developers I talk to, when I ask them, I'm like, do you regret that? Because I have asked quite a few developers, like, do they regret adding? And most of them will almost always say, yeah, like, of course they do, because the servers, there's nobody on the servers for the multiplayer, but people still talk about the single player.
I tell you what, the one example, and I can't go on a podcast without mentioning this game, but it's so relevant to this topic, is BioShock 2's multiplayer. I don't know if you ever played
I forget it's got multiplayer. I forgot.
So I had some great experience. Look, I played that multiplayer just to get the achievements for the game, because that was in my 100% achievement days. I need to play this game just to get the achievements. So I played it with a friend, and I had fun in that regard. But when the BioShock Remastered came out and it said BioShock 2 did not have the multiplayer, I was like, you know what? I get it, because that was never a good fit for that game. The multiplayer, it has some fun aspects here and there, but no one was playing it. The only way that in Australia we could play that game and find a lobby is if we waited until 1 to 2 a.m. when Americans started to wake up. And they would get angry at us because we have shit ping. So it wasn't a fun experience. And that's a perfect example of a game that, look, just do your single player well, because as Doom, as Wolfenstein, as these kinds of games have shown, there's still a big audience there for just a great single-player game. Not everything needs a multiplayer. And also, not every multiplayer needs a single player. And I kind of wish that people would stop looking at a game like Overwatch in lesser of a light just because it doesn't have a single player, because I think that's absurd.
It is. I mean, it is absurd. And I'm actually going to be doing an interview with Derek I think his name's Derek Brown. He's the Aurora 44. He's making a Xbox exclusive called Ashen. It's like a Zelda game.
You talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm doing an interview with him and another open world game designer at the same time. And one of the things we're going to talk about is like, where your resources go, where do you want to spend them? Where do you not want to spend them? And one of the things that came up in this preliminary discussion was where some of those resources should go in a game that doesn't need multiplayer. For example, you have a game like Resident Evil 7, where the boss battles can change. Each boss battle, the bosses can do particular things. I would much rather have more of that, right, than a multiplayer mode in whatever game you're talking about. I want to see games like Doom where it doesn't just have your difficulties, but it has a rearranged mode where you hit it and crazy shit happens.
Yeah.
I want to see those kind of things. And unfortunately, talking to any developer, they'll tell you, resources for testing and stuff. Yeah. We're not allowed that. Well, great. Drop your multiplayer that we all know is going to be dropped anyway.
Yeah.
And make that single player so engaging that replayability isn't really a question. It's a if. It's not like, or it's a win. Sorry, not an if. It's where somebody's like, okay, this next level difficulty rearranges everything. And I want to play that. I want to play it where the enemies shoot different projectiles. There's a couple games when I was growing up where if you beat the game, your next mode you could choose had like enemies that shot other enemies' projectiles. And it sounds stupid, but that was so awesome because you'd go into a place and you'd see an enemy and think, oh, they attack in these three ways. And instead they were attacking with other characters, projectiles and, and you were like, oh shit, I got to rearrange my brain. So yeah, I mean, the resources there, I would much rather see go into devs creating what matters and is what the main attraction of the game is.
You know what? And I think that games that just have single player, I think a New Game Plus can work in almost all circumstances. I think a big example for me is Ratchet and Clank that I used to play on the PlayStation. When you finish that game, you can, because I vaguely remember that game, how you could level up your weapons, and then when you finish the game, you level them up all again. And I'm like, this is awesome. Like, this gun is shooting 3,000 projectiles now. And it's probably like much different to what I remember, but at least I do distinctly remember replaying that game just because you could get better guns. And even that, for some people, is enough of a motivator to replay a game. You don't necessarily need different story elements or different choices, but that does help in terms of replayability. But something to allow people to go back into that game, because there's a reason. For example, I just watched Logan on the other weekend. There's a reason why people want to watch Logan again, because it's a great story and people don't care that they've already watched it again. And I think they've already watched it in the first place. And I think that a lot of games can operate in that regard, where you're playing through the same story again just because you enjoyed it so much the first time. But if there's that something extra to keep you going, and that's something extra that's a little bit fresh, whether it's new weapons, whether it's different or harder enemies, or maybe even slightly smaller, different side quests, or something just to keep us going, I'd much rather resources go into that as opposed to a multiplayer mode that no one's going to play anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, like, for me, rearrange mode's sort of the new hotness for me. Like, it's something that's in the last year has been sort of a mode or an area where I've started to really discuss with developers, like, why isn't this done more? What do you guys need? What does a developer need for the resources for that versus, say, an entire multiplayer? Like, I mean, it's got to be less, right? And then you start talking about testing, of course, on a single player game and stuff like that. But I think that New Game Plus is great. I think rearranged modes are fantastic. But I also think that if that money from day one is not spent on multiplayer or single player, whichever we're talking about here, and is spent in the core gameplay, that can also help, because I've seen that. And again, I have to bring up Resident Evil 7, but being able to see the main bosses do slightly different stuff, it was cool. And I'm like, how many main bosses do that? Very rarely. I mean, almost every game you play, where a bad guy is. Like, you'll come around a corner and be like, bad guy's going to be right there. You come around the next corner and you're like, okay, boss is going to do this attack, then he's going to do this. But if I jumped in and maybe on the next difficulty up, he had an extra type of attack, and the next difficulty up, he had 2 extra types of attacks, that kind of alteration of the basic gameplay mechanics is why I would continue to return to those far more than multiplayer, which was going to die anyway, or which you have to play with fat Americans at 1 a.m.
Exactly. And you know what's great? And the thing about Resident Evil is that it doesn't just do that alteration after you finish the game and you see different things. Even when you're fighting one enemy, I can't remember what they're called, but those like, glaciers from Killer Instinct, how they kind of dissolve from the ground, like those enemies, right? And I remember I was facing one, and I was waiting for it to do its like lunge animation, because once it tried to hit me, it would pause for a little bit and it would give me a chance to do like 3 stabs. And I would keep doing that. I was walking around this table, and then eventually I got to a stage where I cut both of its arms off, so it couldn't do that lunge animation anymore, and it just kept coming for me, and it ended up killing me because there was no chance for me to actually do the exact same tactic that I've been using.
Oh, right.
Resident Evil is great in that regard. It's such a fucking fun game. So you're saying that with Resident Evil, once you finish the main campaign, the bosses are different afterwards.
It's not different. It's that, so you have, I think it's called Madhouse difficulty, I think is what it is. And if you pre-order the game, from what I understand, you actually get this without having to beat it. But basically, what that does is it's a rearranged mode. It rearranges where items are, sometimes the slight puzzle variances. I love it. I mean, and those bosses already do those crazy things, by the way. Yeah. So in the normal version. So no, those aren't added. But what I'm saying is that's what I'd like to see in other games. Yeah. Okay. I like what Resident Evil's done. And I would love to see, some of my favorite games I've played. Okay, for example, Maddie and I have played KOTOR. I've played it well over, I don't even want to say, many times over 100 times. Now, if I could turn on KOTOR tomorrow and there would be slightly different enemy makeups, that I came into an area where I thought there would just be 3 Sith and there's 3 Sith plus a blah, 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 I would be even more interested in replaying it. And those rearranged modes, to me, are a focus I want to see in games moving forward, and not the waste of resources in this multiplayer crap or single player. We see it a lot of times. And what's sad is I talk to developers, and I know you can at with yourself, and Maddie can as well. But when you talk to developers and you ask them, most of them don't want to add it anyway. They just flat will tell you. They'll be like, multiplayer we're adding because people think it's needed. A publisher says it has to have multiplayer. And you're like, oh my God, are you kidding? They're like, no, man. Multiple millions went into the multiplayer that had 100 people peak currency, and you're like, how the fuck?
Yeah,
but it happens.
To a degree, I understand that if it's a big AAA developer and they have the resources to at least fund those modes. But once you're getting into lower to mid-tier publisher or developer territory, that's when I personally think they should really start looking at just one mode. And even as you touched on, even if it's just a different difficulty after you finish the game, excluding the fact that you can probably get those modes if you pre-order, like Metro's Ranger mode or Fallout 4's survival mode, it just changes the game. It makes you want to replay it again because it's different to what you had in the first place. And games,
remember... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, games are slightly different to I mentioned watching Logan again. I think there is a difference there where I think people are more likely happy just to watch a movie again, just to experience it again, because it's only a couple of hours long. But with a game, I think it does really help to have something that little bit different when you play it the second time around.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I do not, and nor am I ever going to say that it's okay for a difficulty to be released as DLC like Zelda's doing. That kind of stuff is so weird, because you mentioned Ranger, and the moment you did, it reminded me of Zelda. Yeah, pre-order, that kind of stuff. I don't like that kind of thing. I'm talking about like day one, Joe Blow. That's the thing too. Even the companies, they get so focused on the people who have the money, the people who are going to pre-order. Well, guess what? Some people don't. Some people are scrounging up. Fuck me. I couldn't get For Honor for review because I didn't have the money. And so it happens to all of us, and you don't have the money to get it. And the consumer needs a good product. Don't split the resources of the product to all this random shit. Focus on what, is the core of the game and build from there. And unfortunately, we do see a lot of publishers and developers, you said it, AAAs, where they'll be like, hey, we have to have multiplayer in BioShock, but do you? I mean, do you?
And you know what? I hope games like Overwatch and Rocket League, even though they're multiplayer, I hope they've shown that a game can just stand on its own with one mode, so long as you kick ass with that one mode. And it should equally apply to a game that's just single player. And I think, for example, when you look at Wolfenstein, that did really great with its single player, and then Doom that tried to tack on a multiplayer. If Doom just came out with a single player, it would have been received, I think, even better, because remember how much negative feedback there was with Doom during the multiplayer beta. There was shit. I was like, holy shit, like, people really hate this game. And then it came out and started getting 8s and 9s. I'm thinking, okay, well, you wouldn't have had that PR nightmare if you just had the single player.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's true. For example, is Prey going to have multiplayer?
I don't think so. Thank fucking Christ. because that game is compelling as a single player.
And I don't even want 1 red cent going to a tester testing multiplayer when your main crux of your story is the single player. And especially a game like that, with transformation being such a big deal, the amount of extra stuff you could do with difficulties in that game would be, oh man, like there's so much cool stuff you could do.
Yeah, insane.
And I don't want to see that. I don't want to see Prey multiplayer. Like it's just wasted money, man. And the developers know it. You know, you talk to developers, they will tell you. They're very open about it after a game's released, of course, where they'll be like, yeah, we didn't, you know, it was not a good mix for us. Shadowrun for the 360, Shadowrun, the multiplayer game. Did you ever play that?
No, I didn't.
It was a shooter, and people were just like, why? Like sometimes somebody at a developer meeting should stand up and be like, do we want to talk about why the fuck we're doing this?
Well, like, you know what game that I think that happened with too was Assassin's Creed. I mean, after Assassin's Creed, I think it was Assassin's Creed 2 was the last one, even though it was the second game, that just had a single player, and then they started bringing in multiplayer, and then they stopped that. As far as I know, I think I can't remember which Assassin's Creed it was. Maybe it was 3 or Black Flag that stopped doing multiplayer. But I agreed with that because it was like Assassin's Creed is a single player game. Like that is what it is known for. And as the next game that added added multiplayer, I didn't play. Partly because I was in my 100% achievement phase, and getting multiplayer achievements are a fucking bitch. But it's also as well because that's not what I liked Assassin's Creed for. And I'm glad they kind of bucked that trend, and I hope it continues down this route where people, like gamers, can just be happy with one really good mode.
Yeah, and all those resources being spent on those. Hell, save money. If you're like, well, we're not going to spend those resources on the single player, then guess what? Still don't add multiplayer. Or if or the other way around. Because I just think that whatever you need to do, whatever you're putting in the game needs to be fleshed out. And I get a lot of heat on reviews for this because I'll mention something, people will be like, well, that's not a main part of the game. I'll be like, I don't care. Money was spent. It was put into the game. I can see the words. The moment I can see the words and pick that thing, it should be fully fleshed out. That's otherwise you're talking about just a complete shit show of a situation where you have to identify magically what really matters in a game. Like that makes no sense.
You can't go half-hearted with a multiplayer. It doesn't.
Exactly.
We've seen it doesn't work. It doesn't matter what game it is because even nowadays, like with Call of Duty, like it's the kind of. They're somewhat going half-hearted with the multiplayer because it's the same thing over and over, and the numbers are dwindling and dwindling. Yeah. We've seen with so many other games that if the multiplayer is just tacked on, for the lack of a better phrase, you get low player counts. People just won't play the thing, and it's taking resource. It's so obvious. People are saying, well, they still had a single player, they still had people working on it, but they still had resources on that mode. It took away from something else. And some people just maybe don't understand that argument, but it's a fact. When you have even a couple of employees working on one thing, they can't work on something else at the exact same time.
Exactly. It's not Back to the Future. There's no fucking time machines.
No, exactly.
And if you rob Peter to pay Paul, at some point, there will be an issue. And that is what happens. I mean, any developer will say this. They've said it. GDC's had some really good, speaking of, Fighting the 800-pound gorilla, Cliff Basinski did a video called Fighting the 800-pound gorilla, and it's based on his creating his new title. And the stuff he talks about is this shit. And in fact, do you know what one thing he took, one of the major things Cliff took from creating his new game and getting it ready against all the other games he's created is the fact that sometimes fans are not to be listened to. And I thought that was really interesting. He was very open to the fact that sometimes, for example, art, he was like, you don't want to get in a tit for tat because you'll never please everybody. Like sometimes it's better to just be like, boom, here's what we have versus, hey, what do you think of this? Hey, what do you think of that? And those are, and he talks about resources being spent on one element of a game in games he's done where he just completely did not believe in it. He was like, it makes no sense. What do we, that's $1 that could be spent somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And I hope we see more companies intelligently look at their metrics and intelligently decide what needs to go in, because we can have successes. Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, right? Mm-hmm. People loved it. Andromeda's multiplayer looks like it's going to be phenomenal. So you can do it, but it has to be real. It has to be a mode, and people have to be 100% behind it.
And usually, you've just mentioned Mass Effect. It's with a developer or a publisher that has the resources to back it. And if they don't, then just focus on one thing.
Yeah,
and that's what I would like to see. And you know what? And sometimes when a developer or a publisher, because of resource reasons, are forced or want to just focus on one mode, the game shouldn't be looked at less favorably just because it has one mode. And I guess that's the overarching theme that I wanted to get across. Because we were talking about BAFTA nominations before this, when a game like Overwatch, on occasions, and it has, beats Uncharted 4, I don't want people to say, well, Uncharted 4 should have won because it has more modes. Because that's stupid, in my opinion. Yeah. So, so long as the game is fun and it does what it does really, really well, forget about how many hours you can chuck into it. Forget about the number, like the physical number of modes you can count on your hand. I think that's irrelevant in terms of a Game of the Year nomination. Because if we were to go down that route, then an indie game would never win Game of the Year. And I think that's absurd too.
It's absurd, but unfortunately, it is a continually growing segment of, I think, of a lot of gamers, especially when it comes to bullet point style arguments, because I think a lot of people don't like it when it's not binary. It's very uncomfortable to argue a position that you're not incredibly strong with. So what happens a lot of times is you hear something, I'll get it myself. Well, this game doesn't offer me 80 plus hours of single player. And and I'm like, well, wait a minute. So you have an exact hour that this needs to offer, not good hours, just hours.
Weren't you talking about your friend that had this tome of he opens his book and says every game needs to have 50 hours replayability, blah blah blah.
And I'm just like, dude, I mean, first of all, you can be as militant as you want, and the industry will laugh at you as other people buy games. Yeah. So you can be a pariah. You can pretend you're better than everybody else by holding back. But the fact is that the industry will continue to move forward without you. Mm-hmm. What needs to happen is you need to be adult about it and understand what the developers also want to create, and go with that. And I don't like the idea of any of this shit where it's where you can argue, oh, it doesn't have single player or it doesn't have as many modes. Well, guess what? Rocket League is one particular style of game. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that game, compared to many other AAA titles, was better. Was a better deal, was a Game of the Year versus them. And it requires a different type of discussion. And I think a lot of people are very uncomfortable with it. They just don't, it makes them really uncomfortable. I've had the discussion with people where you can tell they're getting uncomfortable because there's nothing, they can't point at a bullet point and say, it's got this. And you're like, no, what do you feel? And they're like, and then they have a more difficult, it becomes more difficult for them.
Definitely.
And maybe it's the maturity of this industry because we are newer too. Maybe it'll take another decade or so.
And you know what? Yeah, people need to even I need to think about that. The games industry is still young. It sounds silly to say, but it's very young. I mean, when did gaming really start? In the 90s? Maybe late 80s?
Yeah, I mean, 93. Sega does what Nintendo don't. That kind of stuff. Once it became sort of goofy popular, I think that's sort of when it started. And other industries are 100 years old, and then or literature being 20,000 years. So it's we've got some time for everybody to sort of come together and sort of have a collective understanding of what games have offered in the past, what they're offering now, how they're different than books, and how they're different than movies, and what to expect from them, and how to talk about them.
Yeah,
because talking about, dude, I can't tell you how many times I'll be talking about games. I'll be like, this person, what are they doing? They're like, all, for example, I was in a discussion at GDC where people, well, fucking game. Okay, what do you mean fucking game? What was the problem? Well, it had, the grass texture was blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, I get that. But did the grass texture stop you from because I can mention it in the graphics section and say, but fun factor's still high.
That's nitpicky.
But what happens is they get caught up in those kind of discussions, and then the entire game stops being talked about, and it starts being this really weird meta game of let's find little things that we dislike.
But
and it's
it's really I think that's somewhat in part due to, and I don't see a lot of YouTubers do this, but you see it every now and again. Sometimes I feel that reviewers are just finding things or negative things to say about a game just so they don't seem like they're biased, just so they seem like they're being honest. It's like you can't really like a game nowadays without being paid off or without being biased. But that's obviously not the case. You don't need to constantly say a bad thing about a game just to give that illusion that you're being honest about it. Sometimes a game is just really good and you don't notice that the shadow textures aren't great when you're 3 meters more away from an object or something like that, every now and again there's a frame drop, you mention it, right? But if you're nitpicking just for nitpicking's sake, I don't like that.
Yeah, I mean, hey, shut up, dog. Sorry, my dog barked. For example, I have one particular review that comes up quite often.
Yeah.
And the review is Dragon's Dogma. And a lot of people are like, oh, you're way too positive on this game. And I've listened to it, and I do mention tons of issues, but you can tell just by the spirit of the review that I'm very happy with this game.
Yeah.
And so a couple people have been like, oh, you're a shill, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's fine, because I deal with real shit. These people can talk. I deal with like people dying of cancer. I don't give a shit what some dumbass says. But the discussion is still important, which is, does the reviewer, are they nitpicking? Are they ignoring problems? The real issue here is, though, Lone, you and I are different. So you may say something and I may think, man, that's a nitpick, but that's certainly just the focus that I have versus what you have. And so what I tell people is, go find a bunch of reviewers. Don't find one. Me in particular. I tell people this all the time. I'm like,
I agree.
Go, because I'm always pushing for people to go like Cosmic Engine, for example. I'm like, at least get 3 or 4. And here's why. Because I may not like one little thing about something, but somebody else may explain it to you in a different way. And you can get this overall gathering of information. Because I'm going to tell you right now, I don't know about you, dude. Nobody in my real life do I agree with more than 50% of the time.
You know what? This is something that I've preached for so many years. You should never, ever, ever, ever look at one reviewer and just trust their opinion solely on their on games. And that's not because they're lying or they're biased or anything. But as you said and you touched on, everyone has different perspectives. Everyone has different beliefs and needs and wants and desires. So whenever you have a bunch of different people looking at one game, you're going to get the entire spectrum. That's why, for example, and I know people laughed at it when it happened, but I don't know if you remember Polygon's review of Doom. It was like the reviewer didn't seem to be that good at the game, and people were getting very angry and saying, well, you shouldn't be reviewing this game. I think that kind of review is important for people that maybe not good at games. You know what I mean? Like, you need to look. I know that's not true to its fullest extent, but I think that having people that aren't good at games reviewing games, people that are really good, super great at reviewing games, having that broad spectrum is always a good thing, because you can I guess you can gravitate towards the reviewers that are in sync with your own thoughts, but it's always good to judge and to test your own beliefs against someone that has a much different background to you do. And I'm not saying that Polygon Doom review was good, but I'm saying it does serve a purpose.
Well, the reason why I want to say something is because I actually did a video, a rant about that particular, not the review though. See, I have no problem with their review. What I had a problem with was the video they showed. It was obvious the person had no clue what they were doing. Yeah. Now that goes into a little bit of a different situation where I'm like, you are not reviewing the game right now, because there was a particular video they released where the person was missing every shot. Yeah. It looked like a joke. And it honestly looked like a joke. I would rarely say that, but it looked like they were trying to prove a point. But I agree with you. For example, when I review, I play every difficulty, easy, medium, hard, everything, because I know some of my friends are getting their first consoles today. Yeah. Like today. And so they need to know how to play Assassin's Creed day one. And we have a lot of games where they'll forget about tutorials because they think everybody's played their games. And so some newcomer will be like, dude, so no, those are vital. Those are vital. But I think one of the problems is a lot of people aren't honest too. And what I mean by that is honest with their own failings. Reviewers won't say, hey, I'm not good. A lot of people don't want to hear that they're not good at something. Like, so when you see this review, they don't say, oh, by the way, we don't play shooter games very often. You just see this review and people look at it and go, well, but you're not doing these particular things that you should be doing. And I think that sometimes that just comes into, unfortunately, the buyer. I don't like this, but I think the buyer does have a responsibility, unfortunately, that they have to go and glean these facts from these people and figure this out. And I think that that's unfortunate, but that is where we're at right now. Like, is this person good at first person? Do they like these kind of games? If they don't, did they like this game? And if they did, does that mean it's even better? Or do they like it because it's been generalized to the point to where a hardcore gamer won't like it? And that happens a lot. Yeah. Where you'll get somebody go, this game's great, and people buy it and be like, oh, it's, soft, it's casual, blah, blah, blah. And then you realize that's why that particular reviewer liked it.
And you know what? In that particular circumstance, with, for example, a reviewer that doesn't really play first-person shooter games is reviewing a first-person shooter game, what I think is important in that regard, so long as the reviewer is self-aware that they don't play FPSs, then I'm fine, because I want to know their experience, because there might be other people that haven't played FPSs that are just jumping into this game too. That perspective is important, but what I don't want to see is the person that hasn't played FPSs reviewing the FPSs saying a bunch of negative things because of that fact, because they don't know how to play, then that's not good either. What I want to see is their perspective of playing that kind of genre for the first time and being honest and genuine in their thoughts when they say, look, I haven't played these games, so maybe I don't know how to do this properly, and maybe that's why I'm not finding as much enjoyment in this particular aspect of the game. But so long as they're honest about that and they're self-aware, then I'm fine with that, because again, the overall perspective is important. And if you don't like watching reviewers like that, then that's fine. You go see the reviews that you want to see. But every now and again, it's good to kind of watch a reviewer like that, to kind of temper, or I guess base your expectations off of someone else that maybe isn't an awesome player at FPSs, for example.
Yeah, do you know what's really weird? We have an actual sort of example of this particular situation playing out during a review process, which was Total Biscuit playing a particular game. It's Technomancer. And he was destroyed. And he said, it doesn't have this, it doesn't have that. And it did. It had all the stuff he said it did not have. But what happened was, and this happens sometimes with people who don't play the games all the way through as well. Yeah. One of the problems with your presentation as well is if you do like a quick look, or if you don't play the game all the way through. Because you can say, oh, this game, for example, I had somebody on review Yakuza. I think I said this on the last podcast, where they said, the new Yakuza, they said, the only problem with this game is that you cannot be in anybody else besides the main character. Well, guess what? You can.
Yeah.
And that's when you start going, okay, is that the review? Like, no, now we need to start looking at the truthfulness of it all. And like, are you giving a real example? Is this a review or a let's play? Is this a review or a quick look? Mm-hmm. So you have those as well. And unfortunately, the only thing people like myself can do, I put out achievement pops when I can, so that people can see I've completed the game during the review, like an achievement will pop up. Yeah. Little hints, because here's another problem. A reviewer will be told, you can't say anything after the first chapter. I have an NDA right now that says you cannot talk about anything that happens in this game after the first chapter. So what happens is you'll get people going, oh, the person never played it, there's no later game footage, and so you have the reviewer battling with all these weird expectations as well. And so that's why I say I don't agree with my own friends more than 50% of the time on what games are good. Not even close. So go find a good number of reviewers that have aligned. You've played a game that they reviewed and what they said aligned with what you said, and then watch them. And if they don't align, don't worry. I always tell people, if you think you're going to agree with me, unsubscribe. Oh, dude, the amount of people I've told to unsubscribe is crazy. I'm just like, just unsubscribe, because we won't always agree. Like Maddie and I don't always agree. He hates Primal, and I hate Hardline. It happens, right? I mean, as long as you explain. Disagreement
is healthy. Of course it is. I don't like people when they see a reviewer's opinion that they don't agree with, they kind of, I guess their primal instincts kick in, and they feel the need to defend their game that they love. Like, how could you not like this game? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And I'm just like, but that's their perspective. Like, you can't say that you're wrong because they're not wrong. That's their opinion. Sometimes when it comes to a fact in the game, like you said with Yakuza, you can't play as other players, and I don't like that. But when you can, that's incorrect, right? That's an incorrect fact. But when it comes down to someone's opinion can't be wrong unless it's based on an underlying fact or premise that is actually incorrect, which a lot of the times it isn't, right? So, like you said, find your group of reviewers that your thoughts generally align with, even though not in all instances you're going to be agreeing with them, because you won't. Even though generally you might align with them, there's going to be cases where they'll disagree with what you think. But I think as well, it's important. If you genuinely want to get a great look, like an overall perspective about a game, you need to have those 1 or 2 or 3 reviewers that in a lot of instances you don't agree with, but just to see what they're saying. Because then when you have discussions with other gamers that are like, well, I don't really like this, I don't like this game, and you're thinking, well, how the fuck do they think that? And then maybe, they don't play these games that often, they have a different perspective, and you understand why some people either like or don't like a game that you might like or don't like.
Well, and dude, I mean, the honest truth, your guys' channels are based on it, but Fallout 3 for me, it was this way because I couldn't believe anybody who said they liked it. I thought it was terrible. I told Maddie, I still remember the first time I turned it on, I looked at Cadiz and I'm like, dude, this is a brown simulator. It's just simulating the color brown. It's terrible. It's ugly. It looks nasty. And I kept reading everybody's reviews and I'm big into that. I'm like, okay, what am I missing? What's going on here? Am I just not liking it or am I truly not getting it? And what happened was, luckily, I had a Fallout fan who said, just get through the first part, turn left, and start walking, and see what happens. And I'm like, well, and go where? And he's like, no, go. Don't go anywhere. Just walk. So I was like, okay, no problem. And without that one person saying that, I don't know how long, if ever, I would have returned to one of my favorite games of all time. And that one instance is enough to completely make me always do that, because I would never have got those 600 hours of Fallout 3 amazing times if I hadn't listened to that one person. So from now on, every game I do that.
You know what? Something very similar actually happened to me, not in the same regard, but I played Fallout 3 once through and I put it down and I'm like, you know what? I'm fine with that. And I never even considered it close to being one of my favorite games or anything like that. Because you know what I did on my first playthrough? I powered through it, just did the main quests. I was like, I was in my, finish every game achievements phase. And I replayed it to get all the achievements. Forced to do every side quest. Forced to do every little thing and explore as much as possible. Discover 50 locations was one of the achievements, for example. And that forced me to actually play the game as it probably should be played when you're just exploring and not just treating it like a single-player narrative game, which it's not. And that made me absolutely adore the game. And even though I wasn't told to do that, I did that on my own volition. But it's very similar to you. Once you're told, like, this is why the game is good, you should be doing this and try and experience that, you can actually become much more self-aware and think, well, I was an idiot beforehand, now wasn't I? And I experienced the exact same thing with Borderlands in the past as well. So I'm completely
that was
with
a
you
good
on
example of Borderlands. Yeah, it's crazy. And that's why I'm always telling people, it's like, go find somebody who aligns, but don't always believe them. Don't believe them, but don't always assume that if they dislike something or like something, you will. And what'll happen is, for the most part, I personally think people will just become like more knowledgeable, and I don't necessarily think there can be anything negative from that.
Yeah.
As long as you're knowledgeable on those titles, you can explain why you don't like something. Because I know people who don't like Fallout 3.
Yeah.
And that's fine as long as they can, explain why. And I just think all it does is help the industry. If you have intelligent consumers.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And, tempered with a little bit of control in how you deliver it. But yeah, I mean, for example, a game like Fallout, you and I don't know how many hours, I said 600, but it's more than that I've spent. I can't condense that into a 15-minute review. So check out 10 reviews and you'll get a better understanding of everything that a title offers.
Definitely. Alrighty, so we've been here for about an hour and a half. I think this is a good place to end it. Karak, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, that was a blast, man.
Yeah, definitely. So next week is actually the episode 100 of the H.A.M Radio Podcast. Hopefully we can organize something special for you there. Maddie will be back on then. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching until this point. And until next time, I'll end it the way that I end my videos. This has been the Lone Vault Wanderer and Karak. As always, keep fighting the good fight.